Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche, everybody in Cyberland. Haha. It's your favorite Bawalao. At least I hope so. Omodun, Odileke, coming at you. Hey, with another great video. And let me tell you, um, it's been crazy. It's been a crazy last couple of weeks, to be honest with you. And I like to stay in tune, right? What's going on around the world. And uh and there's a lot of chaos. There's definitely a lot of chaos. I just did a podcast, if you guys don't follow my podcast, on the Israel-Iran, war. You know what I mean? And where's that going? And how do we reflect on that, in the concepts of Ifa? And I tell everybody, that there's a lot of Ifa principles out there that should be followed. At a certain point in time, we have to be able to reflect. But that's not the topic of today. That's not the topic of today. In 2021, right? In the year 2021, the federal government here in the US decided to celebrate, right, Juneteenth, right? And it's not that it wasn't being celebrated already. It's because when I came up, when I was growing up, I saw a lot of people celebrating Juneteenth. And I thought this was just a Texas thing. I didn't really truly understand. I was very ignorant, to this concept of Juneteenth. And the more and more that I decided to kind of dig into this and learn, right? Because that's the big key. Knowledge is everything, right? That's when I decided to truly better educate myself on this concept, better understand what do we talk about, and then better yet, how do I attach Juneteenth to Ifa, right? And I began to create this picture that I think is going to be super valuable for everybody that's tuning in. Right? Boro boy bucheche moyo. Many blessings to you, Moyo. And hey, Moyo, while I got you on here, and for all the members, right, all the members, I really need you guys to send me an email, okay? Because here's what I want to do. I have paperwork that I want to give you for the sake of building your knowledge bank, right? If you're going to be a member of your Fair Bawalao channel, right? I want to be able to start to build your knowledge base. So I created some papers that I want to share with you on every topic that I've been doing, right? So it ties into the YouTube channel, right? So that way, at the end of the day, it's something that you can keep with you so you can reference the video. Now you have a handout, right? And it's that investment, right? Because I know with this thing, it costs money, right? But it's a spiritual investment nonetheless, okay? I'm going to put my email now in the chat. There you go. Now you have it. Let me make sure I spelled it right. But beautiful. But hey, so back on the concepts of Juneteenth, right? I welcome each and every one of you, right? And I thank you all for tuning in. I thank you all for subscribing. I thank you all for, just about anything and everything that you do to support this channel. But more importantly, you know, educating yourself, right? And again, I always tell people I am not the subject matter expert on everything. I am merely one opinion of many, right? And this is not to, overstep my bounds with any spiritual houses, but I want to give education because that's important. This is very, very much needed. Okay, so with that said, today marks more than just a, historical date, right? We enter this sacred moment, June 19th, Juneteenth, but it's a spiritual threshold. And I want you guys to think about this, right? The memory of the ancestors and how those memories rise, right? The Ache of our lineage stirs in the concepts of Juneteenth. The wisdom of Ifa calls to us to remember not only what happened, but who we are. So the purpose of today, the purpose of this particular video for today is let's explore the Orishas. Let's explore our teachings in Ifa. How do we bring it all together as we think about and reflect on this Juneteenth? And that's going to be the biggest thing. Diaz, good to see you, my brother. Good to see you. Appreciate the contributions there, Diaz. And you're always hitting me up and you're always taking care of business, man. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you. All right. So here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, right? We examine Juneteenth through history, but through Ifa, through Yoruba cosmology, through Lukumi spiritual practice, right? We dive in to the Oduns because we need to recall the call of the ancestors. We need to reflect, right, on our own spiritual paths as spiritual warriors carrying forward this ache of freedom. That freedom came at a cost. So I want you guys to kind of just think about that a little bit, right? And as you think about it, I want to share a pataki, right? We all like patakis, right? We all like patakis. All right, so if you like patakis, give me a thumbs up. Okay, so so in this pataki, it comes out of an Odun called Ogunda Bede or Ogunda Ogbe, and it talks about that, long ago, a man was taken captive during a war, and he was enslaved in a distant land, right? He was stripped of his name, he was stripped of his home, he was stripped of his language, right? He was stripped of his own faith, but he never abandoned his Ori, right? And each night, when he closed his eyes, he spoke silently, right, to Orunmila, right, saying, I do not forget you and I don't forget myself. And he made offerings in secret, right, with herbs that he found. He used to whisper, different praises, right? Orikis is what we call them, to the wind. And though his body was bounded, right, he was enslaved, his consciousness remained free. So years passed, right? And one day a child on that plantation, right, began to show signs of divination. And the child spoke truth, right? The child, taught truth that nobody even taught him. And he sang songs from the old times, right? And it was the spirit of the enslaved man's Ori that manifested itself into this world as for a specific reason, to ensure that our traditions and our faith never dies. This child now becomes the guiding or the guide, right, of the bloodline of our spiritual memory. When the plantation collapsed, right, and freedom was declared, right, it was the child that taught silently by spirit. He became the community's first babalao and was able to bring forth the faith. So what do we see? What do we see here? Right, we see that our Ori is internal. Right, here's some of the morals of the story. No man, no chain, no whip can enslave your destiny when your inner mind, your Ori, right? Your Ori Inu, right, is aligned. The Ache of our ancestors, the faith, the practice continues through us, even if they died in chains. Juneteenth is not only about the body's liberation, but it's about reclaiming spiritual memory that was never lost. It was only buried. Right? So I think it's important for us to remember that, because Juneteenth, and I'm not trying to make this a topic on the slave trades and the tragedies that occurred long ago. I want to ensure that we're understanding a little bit more than that, right? So remember, the slave trade occurred on the Ivory Coast off of Nigeria and other neighboring countries that are today Nigeria, right? We understand that a lot of slaves made it to the West. We understand that this is how the Lukumi lineage came to be because of the reflections that Pataki I just gave you, right? This is what a lot of leaders did, what a lot of people stepped up to the plate and took that responsibility did. And I want to make sure that we're all tracking that. Okay. And I keep looking this way because that's where my the YouTube camera is. But so Juneteenth commemorates, right? Not only what the slaves endured when they came west, but Juneteenth also commemorates when the slaves were finally told about their freedom, right? 2 years after technically they were already free because the Emancipation Proclamation, right? And but spiritually, Juneteenth marks a deeper moment, the activation of a collective ache towards liberation. And I want you guys to think about it a little bit, right? The bodies were restricted, the minds lived. If you look at just the slave trade and what the Lukumi practice went through, we start to see that a lot of people were doing things in hiding. That's why the concept of Santeria comes in, right? The way of the saints. But the reason why it was the way of the saints is because they needed to mask the Orishas and etc. And I think we all know this pretty well. So, so we need to kind of reflect now on Odù Ifá. Let's get into the Odù Ifá now. Otura Meji. Otura Meji is a very interesting sign because it teaches us about delayed return, right? It teaches us about exile. When you are no longer welcome in one place and you're told never to return, whether that's a country, whether that's by force, you're exiled. And you eventually, you're going to arrive to a location, right? So this Odun speaks of those whose journey is long, but the destiny cannot be denied. The enslaved knew freedom in their bones before it was even written. And that's something that we always have to kind of remember and reflect on a little bit, right? And some of those reflections that I think is important for each and every one of you to take away from the day is, what cycles in our own lives echo this delay? The slaves had their portion, but each and every one of us have our own portion. What is our delay? Just recently, somebody in my ile, right, asked a question, and I'm gonna call you out, Joel, and asked about, hey, this concept of unity and what else talks about unity, because I do these weekly quotes with patakis, and then I challenge people to give me the moral of the story, right? And I do that with my ile, right? So this concept came in, and I had to remind, hey, there are different ways to, no kidding, at the end of the day, reflect on those things, right? And I'm going to tell you exactly what I wrote, right? Let me pull it up here. I told them, I said, hey, a few things, right, is one is honoring our roles, right? Because the concept of Ogunda Lamasa came in, right? Like that, unity requires each person to know their lane, respect each other's gifts, no egos, just alignment, right? In addition, right, we need to ensure that, unity in our own lives, right? Ritual structure. Ifa shows us the structure to lead, to balance. At home, work, creating shared routines, spiritual rituals that we do, and all those things matter, right? Then we talk about, communications through Ebo. We understand that Ebo is important. It's the unity in breaking down, amongst all of us, those barriers that we need to overcome, right? And it finds that spiritual resolution. It's simple Ebo that you can do with your Eshu or Ogun or Chosi, Osun, even Orunmila, depending on what you have. It's something that's taught to us in order for us to truly get to where we need to get to, right? And so, listening to leadership, aligning ourselves, making peace a priority, understanding our spiritual roadmap, right? What did that Ita in your hand of Ifa tell you? How is it guiding you, and how is it becoming the focal point, that foundation for you to move forward, right? And that was a conversation that we had, and I'm very grateful that Joel put that out there because it was a good teaching moment for the evening, right? So what are we still waiting for? What are we still waiting for? Are we waiting for permission to claim what is ours? Right? And what we're claiming is exactly what I just mentioned a second ago. Right. So then we go into the concepts of ancestral power and Egungun presence, right? And let's talk about that. Right. In Lukumi tradition, the dead are never dead. If you guys haven't figured that out, now is the time to write that down, write it, stamp it, do whatever you got to do. Because the Eguns, our ancestors, right? They carry the voice of the ancestor, right? So in Juneteenth, right? And these type of celebrations, we understand that they're not just voices, they're shouting. Don't forget us. Honor the road that we paved with bones, blood, sweat, tears, breath. Right. So I kind of like this Juneteenth thing, right? I like to understand the history and I like to understand that it reflects very well in Ifa. And it's a slap in the face, right? When we don't, as a community, push forward. Right? Our ancestors paved the way for a reason, right? And we need to take that and we need to run with it, right? We need to build what they already started and we need to build upon it. We don't need to run away. We don't need to go back somewhere. We don't know. Now, this is the evolution. This is the revolution. And it's important for each and every one of us to understand that. So let's talk about Odù Ifá. Let's talk about Odù Ifá. So specifically in Odù Ifá, when I see this particular thought process, I think about an Odun that's called Irosun Iwuri. And this is a particular Odun that teaches us about that ancestral voice that I was telling you about. That those who have transitioned still carry work to complete through us. This is a main reason why we need to ensure that we have a very good connection with our, spiritual selves, our spiritual alignment, are we doing the things that we need to do? Do we have our Teja de Egun? Do we have our spiritual misas done? Do we truly understand what we need to walk and what path? How are we honoring them? Because there's still work to be done. Your bloodline, going back to the very first death that revealed that a destiny still needed to be done. And from that day forward, to understand that everybody was just building debt as it comes, now becomes our responsibility to clear that debt. It's our responsibility to clear that cycle so that our ancestors can rest in peace. We can rest in peace and we don't have to worry about repeating these cycles over and over again. Something that I tell people all the time, if you have a teja de egun, if you have a bóveda, right? Don't be shy. Light a candle, talk to your ancestors, get that intuition, understand what you're doing. Offer cooked meals, right? Call their names. Give thanks to them for their freedom. Or I'm sorry, for your freedom. But more importantly, I think it's important for us to ensure that we're reflecting. And it doesn't matter here, whether you're Isha, whether you're Lukumi, whether you got Egungun, whether you have Egbe, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. How you get to that point is all up to you and your spiritual house. But you got to make sure that you're doing something about it. Right? So, it kind of gives me another reflection point. Right? What offerings are you giving to your ancestral line? You need to think about that. You need to make sure that you're challenging your elders and making sure, well, not challenging respectfully, of course, but making sure that you understand how you're going to do that. Who is your bloodline, right? Who is your bloodline that fought for your chance to sit right now, free, listen to Ifa, speak Ifa, and make the choices that you can make? That wasn't just accidental. That was something that was paved. And we got to think about that for a little bit, right? So now let's talk about Esu. Let's talk about Orunmila. Let's talk about the grand scheme of things, right? Because I think that's important, right? And I'm going to look for any questions that anybody might have out there, as I sip a little bit of coffee. Okay, so now let's go further. Let's go further. Eshu, Orunmila, and kind of the Yoruba cosmology of things, right? On the terms of resistance, right? Eshu, we understand is the Orisha, the crossroads, choice, opportunity, change. the karmic, tax collector. Eshu is a beautiful thing. Eshu is super important, if not one of the most super important iremoles, as well as Orisha, depending on the path and how we see things, right? And particularly, we understand that there's no path to liberation that exists without him. Orunmila being the Orisha of wisdom, divination, witness to creation, the Elereping, right? No freedom lasts without Ori alignment. And we go to Orunmila to understand that destiny, that wisdom, right? So, but together, right, they guide our people. They guide us. They guide the world. It doesn't matter colors. It doesn't matter anything. Obviously, we're focusing on Juneteenth because it was a massive movement for the biggest state, I believe is the biggest state, or maybe the second biggest or third biggest state in the United States of America. You could fit a lot of little countries inside of Texas, but that's a lot of people. A lot of people liberated. They got the great news 2 years after the news was actually announced. And they went to the streets and they celebrated. Right? This is a momentous time in history. Right? And we have to make sure that we're recognizing that. So anyway, let's go forward. Let's talk about Ogunda Ogbe. The pataki that I gave you guys earlier was from Ogunda Ogbe. And this Odun kind of teaches that, even in captivity, right, the inner Ori is free. Right? You may bind the body, but Ori keeps dreaming, planning, resisting. Our ancestors are always going to push us forward. They're always going to make sure that we're doing exactly what we need to do in order to ensure that we get to where we got to get to. So then I kind of reflect on my other reflection point. What chains still bind you spiritually? Your ancestors paved this way. Juneteenth came into play, right? Do you know where you're going and how you're getting there? What path is Eshu opening for you that you might be afraid to walk? You don't think that our slaves and those that were enslaved in Galveston, Texas, or in Texas in general, but Galveston, Texas was where Juneteenth was commemorated, right? When the news was reached. So food for thought. They were scared. Should we be scared? Should we not push forward? Should we not honor those sacrifices and celebrate, as we begin to evolve and push forward? So then I start to kind of think about the Orishas, right? And I think about this emancipation concept, right? And I start to think about, what Orishas align with this type of behavior or this type of concepts, right? And I start to think about the first one that comes to mind is Yemaya. Yemaya, so she received those who perished in the sea. We understand that during the slave trade, a lot of people died at sea. A lot of people were tossed overboard. People didn't make it, unfortunately, and it was a tragedy. But she carried their spirit, right? Their souls, right? And more importantly, today she reminds us of the waters that we crossed, the womb that never forgets. And so Yemaya is very central to this movement, to this understanding, right? Think about if you were in Galveston, Texas at that time, in that moment, and you got to reflect, that, hey, guess what? We're free. We're no longer binded in chains. We can now mourn our losses. We can now look towards the future. We got to begin to heal and move forward. Because that's what Eyobe and the Odù Otura teaches us that. It teaches us to ensure that we're looking at the future. Sometimes we gotta just heal, get over the past in order to really get to the future. Because if not, we're gonna stay stuck. Right? And Yemaya reminds us, hey, listen, I'm the womb. I received my children. I transitioned those children. They still speak to you. Your intuition is important, and you need to always remember that. Ogun. Let's talk about Ogun now, as I begin to try to relate this. He gave us tools, whether it was a shovel, whether it was something to work the plantation, whether it was a blade, whether it was an escape, whether it was, you name it, Ogun got his hands in it. He forged the way through forest and iron. Ogun still sees us and works with us and ensures, right, that there's going to be some form of solution moving forward. Ogun's might never stops. Ogun will always fight for you, and we need to always remember that. Let me talk about Ochun. Ochun whispered survival, right, in song, in her sweetness. When rebellion was too dangerous, she brought us that comfort. Ochung's love, Ochung's fertility, Ochung's ability to sweeten things up when things got sour. Right? Ochung was always there. Obatala. Obatala was very central to this because he had to bring the calm, the dignity, the leadership under duress, how to best organize our folks so that they don't die under the persecution of slave masters, or in this case, in Galveston, Texas. Right now, we talk about, a freedom that was enacted. Right now, there was some tragedy after that freedom of Juneteenth because there was laws like the Jim Crow law and things like that that started to kind of bind again, right? Some of these restrictions, right? And although maybe not enslavement, but cause a little bit of a friction, right? And we got to make sure that we never repeat those things. That's why we look towards the old things like a Yobe to ensure that we're always calm, we always dignity, but we lead even under duress, because history has a funny way of repeating itself, right? And we got to ensure that we are taking the lessons that Ifá teaches us, that the Orishas bring to the table, and we push that forward, and we teach the new generations, and we teach our culture. That's not just something that's elective, that's something that's mandatory, right? So, which one walks through you today in your struggles, right? Those Orishas all walk with the celebration of the Juneteenth, right? In Galveston, we understand that the slave trade brought a lot of craziness and a lot of tragedy, but it was able to bring something that was able to be flourished. Never could we ever justify what occurred, but we have to look at the future vision because Ayobe teaches us that. Which Orisha walks with you and with your ancestors? And that's going to be the big thing moving forward. Hey, Buddha boy, Bucheche Moyo. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Those are awesome donations. I appreciate you. Now, let's talk about Odù Ifá. Let's wrap some of this up together. All right, we talk about Osa Meji. It's a sacred Odù of transformation. Osa Meji, right? An Odù of transformation. This is a sign that becomes kind of refined, but through trial. Osa Meji reminds me of that diamond in the rough, right? When that coal is still not pressurized, but it keeps getting pressured to the point where now it creates this beautiful diamond, right? And we have to reflect on where do we stand in our life. The folks in Juneteenth, as they celebrated, right? They were that coal that came in raw. And through the pressure of enslavement, the pressures of life, right? They became that diamond that you see today. Right? And am I saying that the work still has more movement? Yes. We have to continue that pushing forward. Right? So, the person becomes a light through the fire. The enslaved became ancestors of Ache. Their pain, right? Those slaves that lived before the announcement in Juneteenth in Texas, and even after, and even the slaves that were originally brought from Africa to the West, right? Those that Ache that paved through sweat, tears, blood, etc. Their pain birthed the path of our power today. And we have to be able to give thanks to that. We have to be able to wrap our minds and truly put some perspective into that if we truly want to understand where we're going and how we're getting there. Right? And Ifá teaches us that freedom is not an event. It's a process. Ifá teaches us that true freedom is Ori alignment. No different than the pataki that I read in the beginning that we can reflect on. Every time I say something here, you can reflect on that pataki. Our Egungun, our ancestor reverence, and our daily, resistance to imbalance is mandatory to ensure we're going where we gotta go to. So then I ask you again, what internal fire is transforming you? Are you that diamond in the rough, or are you the diamond? Maybe you're still the coal. And maybe you're still trying to pressurize yourself to the diamond. And we got to reflect on that. How am I moving forward? What have you survived that has made you sacred? Reflect. Because a lot of times people like to think about the losses and not the wins. And I find myself repeating that very concept. And it's important for us to always think about the fact that you are more than just a problem that occurred. You are a person that succeeded and triumphed through other challenges. Now you just happen to have another one. And whether big or small, irrelevant, you're still a winner. And you got to believe in yourself, your ancestors. Those same people that celebrated in the streets in Juneteenth, only to understand that now they can serve in the military, they can vote, right? They had a stake in land and property. To understand from going to slave to now being your own personal person was a huge milestone for those folks. Juneteenth should make us reflect on what do we have today, and are we actually building on those folks that had nothing to a little something, to still having problems with racism and discrimination, to now seeing that, a white person, and I don't want to make this a race thing, a white person, a black person can walk down the street and love, have babies. There's no segregation. We have the greatest capacity of diversity, even in our own country, and I'm sure in many other countries. This is not a segregation thing anymore. Hell, people are protesting all types of things every day, right? And God forbid they don't make it violent and do things, out of the norm. But people are people, and things are always going to get out of hand. But they have that ability, and that's a beautiful thing. We've come a long way in the United States of America, and I just want to make sure that we're reflecting on those things, those wins that we constantly get, and that's important. So in today's age, right? I kind of leave you guys with this. We got to feed our ancestors. I want you to understand, each and every one of you that see this video, is how am I attending my ancestors? What are you doing and not doing? I posted my email address on the chat, right? If you need more guidance on that particularly, hit me up. Let me help you, right? Again, not to overstep other spiritual houses, spiritual leaders, right? That's not my job, right? If you have spiritual advisors, you have spiritual elders, you need to use them. Right? But if you begin to find yourself in this crossroad where you're not getting the guidance or anything, just hit me up. I'm easy, right? I may not answer you right away. Please understand, I'm a very busy person. But understand, how are you feeding your ancestors? They have Egun, Egungun, Egbe, Boveda. You have a spiritual altar. What are you doing? Esu. I already told you, Esu is super important, critical. Between Esu, Orunmila, they're going to begin to build this concept. And for those of you who don't even have warriors, right? It's okay. You know what I mean? There's always things that can be mounted for you, consecrated for you, and Eshu, right? For you to take forward and ensure that that is always, with you. And the essence and the energy of Eshu is with you. Right? If not, go to the sacred place of Eshu. Go to a crossroad. Particularly, I always advise, I like paths, the beaten paths, right? And you find that crossroad like on a hike. Man, what better way to honor Eshu and taking an offering, cleaning yourself with an egg, a piece of fruit, a piece of bread. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Honor Eshu. give your essence by cleaning yourself and give it back to that sacred place in nature where Eshu is residing. And Eshu is everywhere. Don't get me wrong. We focus on the crossroad because of the Orisha portion of Eshu, not necessarily the Eremole, right? Which is Elebara or Elegua, right? And we understand that the doors of opportunity are open and those paths are open to us. So understanding some of those little things that you can do, right? And always, again, going back to your spiritual leaders so they can help you is important. Speak to your Ori. Ask, what freedoms were meant for you now? What is my spiritual path, Ori? Give me an intuition, my Eguns and my Ori working together. Eshu opening up my doors, Orunmila giving me the destiny. All those things come together and you say, damn. You know what I mean? How are you honoring your Ori? How are you honoring God? How are you doing things? What's the morning ritual look like? Don't forget, teach. Juneteenth is very pivotal. And I think that's important for us to always remember. And I want us to remember Juneteenth. I want us to go through it. I want us to be able to synergize that with Odù Ifá, with the Orishas, with our ancestors. So, I leave you with this, right? Orimi, Egungumi, Orunmila, Eshu, Olorum. Basically, I give thanks for the Yache, for those who endured, for those who fought, for those who never saw Juneteenth but dreamt about it, and then they saw it. We honor them with our practice, with our resistance, with our memory, with our love. And I want each and every one of you to do the same. So with that said, hey, Buru, Iboya, Ibucheche, I felt it was only right to do a video to honor the ancestors, celebrate Juneteenth. Love that the United States made this a federal holiday. We were able to reflect and share a video, a teaching moment, and we learn from each other. With that said, Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche, everybody in Cyberland, Shafer Bawalao. I will speak to you guys during our next live. Bye-bye, bye-bye. I'm just going to wave at you guys now, only based on the delay before I end the stream. All right. And there's nothing in the chat, so even better. All right. We're doing okay. Of course, Moyo. Of course. I love doing this. I love teaching. I love instructing. Um, I'm supposed to end the stream, but anybody who's interested, I actually got a 4-year curriculum created on everything for the Yoruba introduction, the Yoruba cosmology, understanding everything, right? And I've been working on this curriculum for years, and I finally is gonna go live next month, right, on my website, or my wife's website. I just kind of I parse off of it. Many blessings, guys. Have a great day.